Hello and welcome to the garden. Well, it's quite an exciting day today because we're going to get the first plants in the ground. So I'm going to start with the onions. Now, these are at the sort of stage where if I don't get them in the ground now, I will need to pot them on. So if I just, with a stick, release one of these little plugs, you can see that, well, they've got quite a bit of root there and it's just starting to curl around the bottom. These were probably perfect for planting out maybe a week or so ago, but I wanted to wait until that really cold weather has passed. So it's looking quite good now for planting out. So I just popped a soil thermometer in the ground here, and the temperature is, well, it's a little bit over 8 degrees, 8.5 maybe. And although I wouldn't sow seed direct in the soil quite yet, I'd want to wait until that was a good 10 degrees. I think it should be fine for the onions to grow on here. And it's certainly better than leaving them any longer in these cells. So the planting area is covered with black weed membrane, which we tend to use when we're not using a bed, just to suppress weeds. And it serves a useful purpose in the spring in that it helps to warm up the soil. So we're going to take that off and give the surface a good raking, and then we should be able to plant out the onions. So I'm just going to use an old plank to try and get the rows more or less straight, and I'll make some holes with a dibber. And I've got this little apple tree in the way here. That's one we rescued from when we were doing the renovations last year, and it would be really nice if we could develop that as a step over at this end of the bed. I will have to see what comes of that. So I will go around that with the rows of onions. So they're all planted now. I've varied the spacing a little bit depending on the variety and which ones I've multi-sown. Now those cells were a little bit dry. I'd water them in anyway, but they were definitely on the dry side, so I'm going to make sure they are well watered in now. And this is the first time we've tried to grow onions in the borders. It's not what we normally use the borders for, but I've been forced to change our usual habit for two reasons. First, because of the changes in the garden layout last year, and secondly because I filled the bed that was supposed to be planted with onions with shallots, so I lost a lot of room there. The soil here is rather heavy, so I don't know how they're going to enjoy this. It's had plenty of organic matter, so it's not a question of fertility. The sort of thing we grow in here regularly are squash and things like that, and they always thrive in the borders, but we'll have to see how the onions like it. So there they are, they're all watered in now, and we've just covered them with some black netting, and that's just to stop the birds from messing about with them. It's only a temporary measure until they've got their roots down. So we've got four varieties here: Rose de Roscoff, Boratana, Rossa Lunga di Firenze and Tropea Rossa. Now later on I've got some Sturon sets to plant out. Now it's still a little bit early to put them out. If we get another cold spell, they're likely to bolt. So I'm going to wait another week or two before I put them in the ground. So next up are potatoes. Now we've already started some 15-litre pots of potatoes in the greenhouses, and they will give us our first crop of small new potatoes. In previous years we've grown our next batch, so more first earlies, then second earlies and main crops out in the beds. But because we've changed the garden around this year, we're going to grow all of our potatoes in pots. So these are 35-litre pots, and I'm going to plant 4 tubers in each. Now I thought I'd be planting some first earlies and second earlies today, and we've just put the main crop potatoes to chit. But actually the first earlies aren't quite ready, so I've got some Pentland Javelin chitting indoors, and the shoots are still pretty small. Now of course I could plant them, it doesn't really make that much difference, but I think I'd rather leave them indoors in the warmer conditions for another week or so until they're a little bit more developed. So what I've got here is the second early British Queen, and these have some quite nice robust shoots on them. Now the early potatoes tend to grow in one layer, so if I plant a tuber down the bottom of this pot, I'm going to get potatoes maybe halfway up, and the top half is just going to be soil. Now with the main crop potatoes it doesn't matter so much because they will produce tubers all the way up, but because these won't do that, I'm going to plant 2 at the bottom, and then we'll put 2 about 1/3 to 1/2 of the way up, and then hopefully we shall get an entire pot full of tubers. I will set those at 90 degrees, so the first 2 one way and then the next 2 the other. Now obviously the foliage is going to come through at different times, but that doesn't really matter too much to me. Now British Queen will produce quite a reasonable sized potato, and if I wanted large potatoes I would have to remove some of these shoots, but for these I'd prefer smaller potatoes, so I'm going to allow all of those shoots to develop, and that should suit our purposes. So in the barrow here I've got some organic peat-free multi-purpose compost. On its own this is a little bit heavy, so we're going to combine that with some horse compost, and that's going to provide plenty of feed, and we're going to combine that with some quite sandy soil. I'm also going to add in some fish blood and bone. And I'm going to give that a good mix. So I'm just going to set the first tubers near the bottom of the pot. Then I'll put two more, the opposite orientation. Then I'm going to fill the pot right up. I'll leave a reasonable gap at the top, partly for watering, but also in case I want to mulch the surface of the pots at a later stage. I'm not going to do that today, but perhaps I'll put something over the top later on, either to keep any weed growth down if there are any weed seeds in this mix, or to help keep the moisture in the pot. So all that needs now is a good watering. And this one I'm going to just leave outside. If we get some really cold weather, I will think about just popping them in the greenhouse for some extra protection, or then I will put some fleece over the top. But at least for a while they'll be okay outdoors. I know they will develop more quickly in the greenhouse, but I'm really not in a hurry for these because we've already got 20 pots of first earlies on the way. So that's it for the potatoes. So these are the first earlies that we've got in the 15-litre pots, and as you can see they're doing quite nicely. Well clear of the surface of the soil now, and now they should start to grow away quite quickly. So the final thing I'm going to plant out today are these dwarf broad beans. Now we were going to put these in one of the main veg beds, but I decided in the end to put them in along this border. Well, we don't have a tree in this position, but even if we did, it's going to take quite a long time to fill out this fence. So in the meantime, this is a wasted piece of ground just along the edge here. So these broad beans can go here. They're sheltered from winds, at least in this direction, and if need be I can give them a little bit of support with a bit of string around the mesh here. So I think this should be a reasonable place for them. Now you can see there's quite a lot of root down the bottom end of the pot, and that's not ideal really. Looks like these should have gone in maybe a week ago. Now I used quite a reasonable sized pot for that very purpose, so I don't have to rush to get them planted, but it looks like I underestimated quite how much root development there was down the bottom of the pot there. But I expect when they get into this soil they'll be fine. So I've got 20 of these dwarf broad beans planted out now, and more were sown a few days ago to follow on. Well, that's all the planting for today, but it won't be long before we have to get the first batch of alderman peas in the ground. So we've just been putting up this frame here. Now these are 10-foot canes and they're pushed quite a way into the ground, but that still leaves us with 7 or 8 feet of frame, and that's going to be quite handy because alderman peas are really rather tall growing. We've put a couple of pieces in at an angle to give some bracing, and this is reasonably solid, I think. And we've got some jute netting on order, and we're going to run that over this frame and the peas can climb up that. Now hopefully that arrives in time, otherwise I'll be putting some strings around the bottom of the frame to give them a start. As you can see, the young pea plants are doing quite well there, and almost certainly they'll need to get in the ground within a week or so. You may just be able to make out that they're just starting to produce the tendrils which are going to allow them to climb. So yeah, these really haven't got long before they need to be planted out as well. Well, it's always nice to get the first crops actually in the ground. But that's all for this video, so thanks very much for watching and bye for now.